thank you all the organizers. Good morning to all, first of all. And also I have to express my regret not to be there in person. And I thanks the organizer to allow me to join via Zoom with very short notice. And I also want to thank the organizer to allowed me or to invite me to this very interesting symposium. Although I do not have a paper on the specific topic on fauna, but I'm very happy also to share it with you. I am presenting in fact, the edition of Dedicatory Inscription addressed to God Bashamum Yathaʿān, which forms part of a private collection. I had the opportunity to examine in Sana'a back in 2013, which was unfortunately my last visit to Yemen. Uh, Although this text does not offer new relevant information from a historical point of view, it is nonetheless significant for several other reasons, as it provides our second attestation for the epithet Yathaʿān associated with god Bashamum, and offers valuable insight into the linguistic situation of the Wadi Marka region during the first centuries of the Common Era. The inscription is carved on a white limestone slab, approximately 41 by 30 centimeters, with letters about 2.2 centimeters in height. The text comprises 11 lines and is largely legible, though the first word is partially damaged and the ending also presumably lacks one or two letters. During the incision process, the scribe made some visible corrections, particularly in lines 3 and 4. From a paleographic perspective, this inscription exhibits several distinctive characteristics that merit attention. The script demonstrates general competence. The carver used the available space effectively and maintained well-aligned lines. However, certain letters display stylistic inconsistencies that are worth noting. For example, the letter Zain is formed with double strokes, while the letter Dal feature an additional vertical stroke, which is already seen elsewhere. The letter Mim shows irregular execution. Similar observation apply also to letter Ba, which occasionally assumes a more rectangular form, sometimes is narrower. The letter Ra is serpentine in shape, Kaf exhibits curved upper strokes, and finally, a Waw takes the form of a double loop, which is an important dating clue. These features suggest a later date than that proposed for the other dedicatory text addressed to Bashamum Yathaʿān, which is the text known as University Aden Museum 507, so UAM 507, which was also published by Alessio Agostini in 2013 in Semitica and Classica, which has been dated to the 1st century CE. So, taking into account all these elements, I would suggest a 2nd century date, 2nd century CE date for the present inscription. Let's now turn to the content of the inscription. The text begins with the mention of 3 individuals whose names can be reconstructed as Abdum, Il-Rafa, and Marthadum. These 3 individuals are followed by 3 additional names, preceded by the term Banu, Markam Saad, and Abdum. The nomastic evidence here is interesting. The first personal name Abdum is already well attested in Qatabanic, while Il-Rafa is so far attested only in Sabaic. Marthadum, on the other hand, is common personal name attested across all South Arabian languages. The sequence of names following these 3 individuals, which are Markam, Saad, and Abdum, merit also attention. Markam, Saad do not display any conjunction, as we see, and for this reason we could also interpret them as a double lineage, but the former do not have any previous parallel. While Abdum is known as a lineage name just in Sabac inscriptions. Therefore, the possibility of consider them also as proper patronymics should not be completely ruled out. These individuals dedicated their offering to their god and their lord, Bashamum Yathaʿān, lord of Hiraf and Nalum. Here we encounter the deity that is central to our text. The use of both God and Lord as qualifications is entirely typical for this deity. The two place names mentioned, Hiraf and Nalum, designate the two temples associated with the cult of Bashamum in several inscriptions from Wadi Marka. The association of these two sanctuaries with the specific manifestation of Bashamum Yathaʿān is confirmed by the earlier text from the museum that I have just mentioned. The dedication consists of two objects. First, a statue, spelled Zalamum rather than the expected Salamum, a phenomenon I will return to later, whose value is specified as 8 and 4 khalif in bronze. The term madalwat possibly indicates a weight value and is attested in Qatabanic, in comparable contexts expressing the value of votive objects. A cognate noun is well attested also in Hadramutic, particularly in expression closely resembling this passage, which specifies the weight of sacred offerings, typically made of red bronze, a variety presumably of higher quality. The numeral 8 and 4 show the expected reverse gender agreement, but the relationship between these two numerals remains somewhat uncertain, given that the first number is with mimation. My interpretation is that the numeral 8 stands independently and should be connected with the value madalwat, while the subsequent numeral 4 is in a construct state with khalif, suggesting two distinct values. Close parallels occur in Hadramutic inscriptions where similar expressions specify that bronze tablets weight 1 or 2 khalif. This suggests that the statue mentioned here was of medium size. The second element of the dedication was what I translate as the watering channel from the altar at Hiraf. The term Shargum is generally interpreted as watercourse and appears in Sabac and Minaik inscriptions. In this religious context, the term possibly denotes a hydraulic structure, specifically a channel leading from the altar and associated with libation rituals. The dedication may refer only to a new coating, possibly in metal, of a pre-existing channel rather than cutting a new channel into the temple floor. Such a drain was likely already present adjacent to the libation altar. The inscription then explains the circumstances that motivated this dedication, and the text becomes particularly rich in both linguistic and cultural information and sometimes not very clear from a syntactic point of view. The dedication was made for all the events for which his subject Abdum sought help from the god. The term mangat, translated as events, frequently occurs in central Middle Sabac to indicate its general occurrence. The term is semantically neutral. Its connotation, whether positive or negative, is determined by the context. The verb sought help, ta'anai, derived from the root anai, is particularly interesting. It is formed with a ta prefix, which could be associated with the Sabac reflexive pattern. The typical Qatabanic form with infixed ta, atnai, occurs in a similar context, specifically in the description from the Aden Museum that I just mentioned. Notably, the verbal form ta'anai is not attested elsewhere in Sabac, but the possibility of a secondary stem, which would also explain the presence of the prefixed form in Qatabanic should not be totally ruled out, as already indicated by Anne Multhoff in one of her articles. The text continues because Bashamum helped his subject Abdum for the release given by Bashamum and the son of Bashamum from the request that was over him. The verb helped, harada, appears in the typical Sabaik H causative and is attested exclusively in Sabaik inscriptions, while the root rada, with the same meaning to help, also occur in Qatabanic in the basic stem. The causative stem remains unattested in this language. We are clearly dealing here with the Sabaik interference in Qatabanic. The phrase "the release given by Bashamum and the sons or descendants of Bashamum" requires some additional observation. On syntactic grounds, Fadai could be interpreted as a noun in a construct state governed by two subsequent elements, so the divinity Bashamum and the descendants of Bashamum. This suggests that the involvement of both a divine agent and a human group in the release of Abdum from his obligations. The expression son of Bashamum may indicate a human group of Abdum fellows citizens, all sharing devotion to Bashamum. The request mentioned probably concerns a concrete obligation waiting upon Abdum, and the reference to the descendants of Bashamum suggests that Abdum was indebted, maybe, to some of his fellows. The text elaborates that this obligation was something which they, or perhaps he, this is, yes, the which they or perhaps he should have been charged with, but Bashamum intervened and protected his subject, Abdum, in all the events that he had undertaken for him. Here we encounter the expression "dhu kadam homo," which is a Sabaik expression, as indicated by the Sabaik third-person masculine plural suffix homo. The plural may refer to the three subjects mentioned at the beginning of the inscription, although more likely the suffix might represent a fixed form without full awareness of grammatical agreement, thus referring only to Abdum, which is in fact the main actor of the text, in fact. The verb arch, meaning to intervene, to happen, is common in Qatabanic, particularly in religious contexts, denoting divine intervention, while the verb saman derives from the root aman, takes the typical Qatabanic causative form and means to protect, grant protection, parallel to its Sabaik equivalent. The inscription then shifts to a supplication, may Bashamum continue to protect his subject, Abdum, for all that he should be requested. The expression Wazamu Lazan shows an emphatic double use of the root Waza. The text concludes with a statement of complete dedication, Abdum, Il-Rafa, and Marthadum, entrusted to Bashamum their faculties, their resources, their people, and what they possess in a typical Qatabanic expression. Finally, the inscription ends with the invocation, Bashamum, Ilhan, and Waddum. The latter is highly integrated, as you see. The deity Ilhan is attested in two texts from Wadi Marka, with additional attestation in Sabaik inscriptions, particularly from the highlands. The proposed restoration of the theonym Wad appears the most plausible, given the prominence of his cult in the region, especially during the Hausan's second Renaissance, so to speak. Let's now address the question of provenance and the broader cultic context. Establishing the provenance of this inscription depends almost entirely on the theonymic evidence, since the text yields minimal historical data and the onomastic evidence offers insufficient support for precise localization. The deity Bashamum Yathaʿān provides the most significant clue. Attestation of this deity points to a strong association with the Wadi Marka region, specifically the ancient city of Halazum, which corresponds to modern Hajar Warras, located in the Wadi Lajia, a tributary of Wadi Marka. This geographical identification finds strong corroboration in Aden Museum text 507, which supplies more explicit topographical information. The present dedicatory inscription was erected at the temple of Hiraf, which further suggests that the original location of the text should have been at Halazum. Thus, despite the paucity of internal historical and prosopographical data, the Celtic context enables a reasonably secure attribution of the text to this specific site in Wadi Marka system. The cult of Bashamum deserves some comment. Even though this theonym derives from the generic term denoting aromatic substances central to South Arabian commerce, the cult does not appear to have been widespread and is therefore classified as a minor deity. The masculine gender of this divinity has now been established despite earlier uncertainty. The majority of the approximately dozen extant documents relating to this deity come from Qataban, although several isolated documents have been discovered in the Menian context, dating to a relatively early period around the middle of the first millennium CE. The epithet Yathaʿān, associated with Bashamum, is particularly noteworthy. As anticipated, before the present inscription, the epithet was attested only in one text. Interestingly, the epithet was already employed for the deity Aranyada in the Jove several centuries earlier, but a connection between these two far-removed Celtic traditions is difficult to be considered. From a linguistic perspective, this text exhibits a notable mixture of Sabaic and Qatabanic features, which represent one of its most significant characteristics. Although the pronominal suffixes are largely sibilant in accordance with standard Qatabanic norms, and these suffixes are used regularly at the beginning and at the end of the text, there is one instance of the Sabaic masculine plural suffix, pronominal suffix, homo, as I mentioned earlier. This may represent a borrowed expression, although the particular plural is not entirely appropriate in this context as far as the number is concerned, suggesting that it was used as a stylistic choice, although not totally suitable from a grammatical perspective. Similarly, there is clear evidence of a Sabaic type causative form, the verb harada means to help, and peculiarities in the construction of the reflexive verbal stem, which often shows a tap prefix morpheme characteristic of Sabaic, but as I have anticipated, this is less conclusive because of other possible secondary stems which are not always easy to be identified in the verbal constructions. Another noteworthy aspect is the use of the term thalamum for statue rather than salamum, which may indicate confusion between the emphatic, the zain, and the sade. This phenomenon, which appears to have become more prevalent from the 3rd century CE onwards, has been interpreted in various ways. Some scholars consider it phonological significant, as did Beeston, for example, representing a genuine merger of the two phonemes, while others, as lately Sign, tend to minimize its importance, treating it as a simple graphic error facilitated by the close similarities between the two signs. Evidence from other inscriptions, particularly abecedaries, suggests that in at least some cases we are dealing with a genuine phonetic merger than mere scribal confusion. What can be deduced from this linguistic mixture? The text suggests presumably that dating slightly later from the other known documents from the area, specifically around the 2nd century CE, a form of Qatabanic was still in use at Halazum or Wadi Marka. This variety should be classified as marginal Qatabanic, a term used by Dazi to describe varieties of Qatabanic that show significant influence from neighboring languages, particularly Sabaic, and which is usually attested in peripheral areas. The sociopolitical implication of this linguistic evidence require caution. Considering linguistic evidence as a meaningful indicator, we may tentatively propose that the region maintain significant independence after the 1st century CE. This would situate our text in a transitional phase. Qatabanic authority and the second flourishing of Auzan had already waned, while Sabian and Radmanite control over this portion of the interior valleys had probably not yet been firmly established. The presence of Sabaic linguistic features in what is fundamentally a Qatabanic text could be explained in several ways. This might reflect the growing influence of Sabaic as a prestigious language, even in regions that maintain political independence for a while. However, it might also simply reflect the complex linguistic situation of an intermediate period, when speakers navigate between different linguistic and cultural traditions. In conclusion, the text offers a window into the linguistic and cultural situation of this region during what appears to be a transitional period of the 2nd century CE. The mixture of Qatabanic and Sabaic suggests a complex sociolinguistic environment, one in which local tradition coexisted with external influences and in which political boundaries may not have coincided neatly with linguistic ones. And thank you for the attention.